The alleged letter from Pontius Pilate to Roman Emperor Tiberius. Greetings, Your Majesty. Recent events in my province have been so extraordinary that I feel compelled to detail them fully. I believe they may influence the future of our nation. It seems the gods have distanced themselves from us, and I am almost ready to declare the day I took office in Judea as accursed. Since then, my life has been plagued with worry and distress. Upon arriving in Jerusalem, I took possession of the praetorium and organized a grand banquet. I invited the Tetrarch of Galilee, the high priest, and his officials, but they did not attend, which I took as a slight to Roman authority. Days later, the high priest visited me with a feigned seriousness, claiming his religion barred him from sitting at table with Romans. Yet, his expression betrayed his true intentions. It is clear that the high priests here are a threat to Rome, ready to betray even their own mothers for power and wealth. Jerusalem, among our conquered cities, is the most difficult to control, with a populace so rebellious that I live under constant threat of revolt. I command only a centurion and 100 men, and though I requested reinforcements from the governor of Syria, he could spare none due to his own province's needs. Our ambition for expansion seems to outpace our capacity to defend what we have taken, and I fear this may lead to the fall of our governance. I kept my distance from the people, wary of the priests' influence on the rebels. Still, I sought to understand the mindset and actions of this populace. Among the many rumors, one about a young man in Galilee caught my attention. They spoke of someone preaching a new doctrine, claiming to be sent by a god. Initially, I thought he might be inciting rebellion against us, but soon realized this was not the case. Jesus of Nazareth appeared more a friend to Romans than to Jews. Once, passing through the square, I saw a large crowd gathered around a man leaning on a tree, speaking with such calmness that I knew it was Jesus. The contrast between him and his listeners was striking. I chose not to disrupt his speech with my presence and instead sent my secretary Manius, who is of my total trust and fluent in Hebrew, to listen among the crowd. Manius returned with tales of wisdom unlike any found in the works of philosophers. Jesus' words were practical and profound. When asked about paying taxes to Caesar, he replied, "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." This wisdom led me to grant freedom to the Nazarene, despite having the power to imprison or exile him, as is Roman custom. Jesus offered protection, perhaps unwittingly, allowing him the liberty to act, speak, gather people, and choose his disciples without hindrance. Should the gods forbid our ancestral religion from being replaced by Jesus' teachings, this tolerance might contribute to Rome's downfall, and I, as an unwitting instrument, would be part of what the Jews call providence and we call fate. Jesus' freedom unsettled the wealthiest and most powerful Jews. He was unyielding in his criticism of them, calling the scribes and Pharisees, like vipers, likening them to beautifully painted tombs that are full of death inside. He challenged local traditions, valuing humility over social status. Complaints about Jesus' boldness reached the praetorium daily, warning of potential stoning, a common fate for proclaimed prophets in Jerusalem. Preparing an appeal to Caesar, I found support from the Senate and a promise of reinforcements after the Persian War. Without sufficient troops to quell a revolt, I decided to restore peace by inviting Jesus to the praetorium for conversation. Though of Spanish and Roman blood, I am not easily frightened or moved. Yet, when Jesus appeared, I felt as if my feet were glued to the marble floor, trembling as if seized by guilt, while he remained serene, embodying innocence itself. He approached, and with a subtle gesture, it seemed he said, "I am here," without uttering a word. I was struck by admiration for this man, unlike any deity or hero our artists have portrayed. There was nothing repulsive about him, yet I felt old and frail in his presence. Finally, with a quivering voice, I addressed Jesus of Nazareth, acknowledging the past years of granting him freedom of expression without regret. His words were wise and practical, surpassing those of Socrates or Plato. The emperor is aware, and as his representative, I feel I have erred by granting such freedom. I warned him that his words had attracted powerful enemies, much like Socrates had, and they were even more enraged by his teachings and my allowance of his free speech. Some accused me of conspiring with him to weaken the little civil power Rome still permits the Hebrews. My advice, not an order, was for him to be more cautious and moderate in his speech, considering how his enemies might exploit his pride to incite the ignorant populace against him, forcing my hand by law. Jesus replied calmly that earthly rulers' words do not come from true wisdom. He likened asking the mountain to stop in the valley to obeying the laws of nature and the Creator God, implying that only God knows the flow of events. He foretold that before the rose of Sharon blooms, the blood of the righteous would be shed, but his blood would not be spilled. I, moved more by his wisdom than by all the restless Pharisees who misuse the freedom we've granted them, suggested that my praetorium would be a sacred refuge for him day and night. Jesus, undisturbed, smiled serenely and said that when the time comes, there would be no refuge for the Son of Man on earth or beneath it, pointing upwards to indicate that true refuge lies in the heavens, and what the prophets wrote would come to pass. Apprehensive, I told him I was forced to turn my plea into an order. The security of this province, under my responsibility, demanded it. He needed to moderate his speeches and should not underestimate the consequences of disregarding this order. As I wished him farewell, he responded that he had not come to the world to bring unrest but peace, love, and charity, born on the same day Augustus Caesar brought peace to the Roman Empire. Persecutions would not come from him but from others, in obedience to his Father's will, who showed him the path to follow. Thus, I urged him to control his words, as it was not in his power to keep the victim on the altar of expiation. As time passed, the aging Herodes, ruler of the region, joined Jesus' enemies to exact vengeance. If it were solely up to Herodes' will, he would have ordered Jesus' death immediately. Despite his royal pride, he hesitated to act in a way that might harm his influence with the Senate, or perhaps, like me, he also feared Jesus. It is not fitting for a Roman officer to admit fear of a Jew. The Jewish festival of Passover approached, bringing with it the intent to harness the popular fervor that typically gripped the city. Jerusalem was filled with a boisterous crowd clamoring for Jesus' death. My informants reported that the temple's treasury had been used to bribe the populace. The danger was imminent, and I could only muster a Roman centurion with 100 infantry and 100 cavalry. However, he refused to act. I found myself isolated, surrounded only by a small group of veterans in a hostile city. The lack of soldiers made it impossible to contain a revolt, leaving me no choice but to endure the crowds shouting, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" At that time, 3 major factions united against Jesus: the Herodians, the Sadducees, and the Pharisees. The ambiguous position of the Herodians and Sadducees had dual motivations. They hated Jesus but were also weary of Roman domination. They never forgave me for entering the holy city with banners displaying the Roman emperor's image, a grievous error that seemed unforgivable to them. Additionally, I had suggested using part of the temple's treasure for public works, which the Pharisees, already enemies of Jesus, found unacceptable. They cared little for government and harbored resentment over the sharp criticisms Jesus directed at them wherever he went. Moreover, dealing with an unruly and irresponsible population ready to join any revolt and take advantage of ensuing chaos was a constant challenge. In this situation, Jesus was brought before the high priest and sentenced to death. It was then that Caiaphas, the high priest, openly pursued his mission to confirm the condemnation and ensure execution. I responded that since Jesus was from Galilee, Herodes should judge the case and order Jesus to be sent to him. Herodes, feigning false humility and deference to the representative of Caesar, returned Jesus to me, shifting the responsibility into my hands. Soon, my palace became a focal point of discontent as the number of agitators grew. Jerusalem was invaded by crowds descending from the hills of Nazareth, as if all Judea had converged on the city. A seer named Gausa, claiming to foresee the future, fell at my feet, weeping and warning, "Beware, do not touch that man, for he is holy." She described visions of Jesus walking on water, flying on the wind, speaking to the storm and fish obeying him, rivers running with blood on Mount Catherine, and statues of Caesar weeping, with the morning sun appearing like a morning virgin. If these appeals were not heeded, great calamity was said to await, threatening the curse of the Roman Senate and the thrones of Caesar. As the clamor grew, I asked the crowd what they wanted, and they shouted for Jesus' death. "What crime has he committed?" I inquired. They accused him of blasphemy, prophesying the temple's destruction, and declaring himself the Son of God, the Messiah, the King of the Jews. I stated that Roman justice does not condemn anyone to death for such charges, but the cries of "Crucify him!" only grew louder, shaking the palace walls. In the midst of this chaos, Jesus remained the only calm one. After several failed attempts to protect him from his enemy's wrath, I resorted to a customary practice of releasing a prisoner during festivities and offered to set Jesus free. However, the crowd insisted on his crucifixion. The scarcity of soldiers made controlling the uprising impossible, and the only option was to endure the relentless crowds. At that critical moment, 3 factions, the Herodians, Sadducees, and Pharisees, joined forces against Jesus. The Herodians and Sadducees, with mixed motives, despised Jesus but also resented Roman rule. They never forgave me for bringing banners with the emperor's image into the holy city. My suggestion to use temple funds for public works was deemed unacceptable by the Pharisees, who were already at odds with Jesus due to his stern criticisms. The Pharisees cared little for governance and held a grudge against the incisive remarks Jesus made wherever he went. Besides these groups, I had to deal with a disorderly population, ever ready to join a revolt and exploit any chaos. Jesus was then judged by the high priest and sentenced to death. It was at this point that Caiaphas openly sought to confirm the condemnation and secure the execution. I contended that since Jesus was from Galilee, Herodes should be the one to judge, and thus, I ordered Jesus to be sent to him. Herodes, displaying a facade of humility and respect for Caesar's representative, returned Jesus to me, effectively placing the responsibility back in my hands. Soon, my palace became a center of unrest as discontent surged. The city of Jerusalem was like a storm, with crowds demanding Jesus' crucifixion. A seer named Gausa warned me, "Beware, do not touch that man, for he is holy," recounting visions of Jesus performing miracles and natural phenomena that seemed to foretell doom. The pressure mounted, and I felt alone, with only a few veterans at my side in a city turned hostile. The procedure I was familiar with for releasing a prisoner during such times was disrupted when the crowd chose Barabbas over Jesus. I washed my hands before the furious crowd, declaring that in my judgment, Jesus of Nazareth had done nothing deserving death. But the cries of, "Crucify him," only intensified, and the fate of Jesus was sealed. I had seen civil unrest before, but nothing compared to that day. It seemed as if spirits from the netherworld had gathered in Jerusalem. The crowd did not walk but was dragged and whirled like a tempest from the gates of the Praetorium to Mount Zion. The air was filled with cries surpassing any agitation I had witnessed in Pannonia or the Roman Forum. Darkness slowly descended like a winter twilight, reminiscent of the death of Julius Caesar in the Ides of March. Here, I, the governor of a rebellious province, stood cornered in my basilica, watching the grim scene unfold. Outside, Jerusalem lay deserted, its inhabitants having fled through the funereal gates towards Jamnia. A sense of sorrow and desolation hung in the air, and my faith seemed to join the cavalry. The centurion struggled to maintain order amidst the chaos. Alone, with my heart heavy, I was warned by signs in the heavens and on earth. It was said that Dionysus the Patriarch exclaimed, "Either the Creator is suffering, or the universe is crumbling." Meanwhile, a terrifying earthquake shook Lower Egypt, striking fear into the hearts of superstitious Jews. An elderly Jewish scholar named Balthazar, a close friend of the Nazarene, was found dead after the quake. Whether from fright or grief, no one could say. As the first hour of the night approached, I wrapped myself in my cloak and descended to the city gates near Golgotha. The sacrifice had been completed. The returning crowd was agitated but carried a somber air of repentance for what they had witnessed. I observed my small Roman court passing by in silence and dejection. The standard-bearer veiled his eagle standard in mourning. I overheard some Jewish soldiers murmuring incomprehensible words, while others spoke of miracles, which Romans often associated with their gods. Certain that the events would bring new signs, groups paused and looked back towards the Mount of Calvary. Returning to the Praetorium, my heart weighed down by the stains of the Nazarene's blood on the stairs, I encountered an elderly man kneeling, surrounded by Romans in tears. He bitterly lamented, for an old man to weep is always painful, and my already sorrow-laden heart was further moved. Weeping together, it seemed everyone there, and many in the crowd, were on the verge of tears. Never before had I witnessed such a scene. Those who had betrayed, sold, and called for Jesus' crucifixion now vanished like cowards. I heard that they tried to cover their actions by spreading rumors of Jesus' resurrection and the theft of his body by his disciples. This was to be expected from a crowd that had just experienced something beyond human comprehension. Clouds gathered over the temple, spreading a somber veil across the city. Visible signs in the heavens and on earth accompanied these events. Regarding the physical description of Jesus, Pilate portrayed him as an impressive figure, unlike any other. Jesus was of average stature, with a calm demeanor and a serene presence that drew attention. His face displayed kindness and peace, even in critical moments, and he looked upon others with compassion, as if understanding their very essence. His hair was long and soft, falling harmoniously over his shoulders, slightly wavy, and ranging in color from light brown to blonde, standing out among the local people. His eyes, remarkable for their depth and penetrating gaze, varied in color from light brown to blue, depending on the observer, conveying wisdom, kindness, and a firm grasp of life's essence. His skin was fair and smooth, reminiscent of someone who worked outdoors yet maintained a healthy and well-cared appearance. His face was considered beautiful and symmetrical, with features that inspired trust and reverence, not an ordinary face, but one that exuded authority without being imposing or threatening. He kept a full and well-tended beard that added maturity and dignity to his appearance. Jesus dressed in a simple yet dignified manner. His clothes, though modest, were clean, usually consisting of a long mantle and tunic. He wore no flashy ornaments or jewelry, reflecting his detachment from material possessions. His appearance communicated humility and simplicity, yet amidst his notable presence, he conveyed a message of peace and welcome without uttering a single word. Now, noble sovereign, I present to you the most faithful account of these events. I have strived to recount every detail so that you may justly evaluate my conduct, aware of the many criticisms directed at me concerning this matter. With promises of loyalty and respect to my sovereign, I remain your most obedient servant. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to the channel now.